Thanks very much. I'm going to start this session on AI and tech by first putting aside the tech. But to save, please, I'm going to give everyone as much of an opportunity as possible to ask the questions. So please start submitting from right now. Secondly, I would be remiss if I did not say that we are actually, the center is impeccable in its timing in having this session on AI and tech. There are large issues that we know emerging as it relates to open AI. So at some stage, we do have to address that. But how I'll do it is like this. Obviously, there are concerns and interests as it relates to the entire industry now, AI industry, as it relates to open AI. So I'll ask each of the panelists to start in addressing it as far as they are comfortable in doing so. Jasmine may have some limitations, so to speak, so I shall leave it to her to decide. But at the same time, for the rest of the panelists, if you could just give us your quick take on what has happened so far, what you know of what has happened so far, what it means for the industry, and where you see us going forward on that in general terms. As part of your opening remarks as well, address that, and then if I can suggest somehow or other including further points as it relates to yourselves individually. Christine, you obviously come from the investment and financial industry space. So take the perspective from there as well in terms of how you see potential risk and rewards as far as technology and investments are concerned. Jasmine, obviously expert in government and regulation. So give us your take on how you would see us striking a balance between innovation and responsible governance. Whether or not you want to use the open AI example, I'll leave it entirely up to you. I'm sure our audience wouldn't mind. And Ilaria, you also have experience in the healthcare, education sector, tech sectors there. Give us your examples as you would have seen in recent interactions that you would have had there in terms of the risks as well as opportunities both in AI and tech. So to start off, maybe Christine, and then Ilaria, and then Jasmine.
Okay. Thank you, Jaime. Well, it's nice to see you all. It's an interesting time, and I must say it's been an interesting weekend because every morning we wake up with news. So maybe from an investor stewardship perspective, we can start off with looking at what a structure does. Structure determines the power dynamics of an organization, whether it is a commercial or a nonprofit organization. So in a traditional sense, investors would expect that the board of directors is held accountable and represent their interest. And board of directors then hold the executive for their performance and then in turn answer the shareholders. In an alternative or hybrid structure that we sometimes have encountered, if the board of directors is holding the organization executive accountable, but if the shareholders do not have a direct link to that particular organization, which seems to be the case in a hybrid structure that we've been talking about, then it creates interesting dynamics, and which probably is the reason why it has led to a lot of news that we have seen so far, because it is not a traditional governance model. In terms of how things unfold, I think it's still too early to say, and I'm not really in a position to say that anyway. But on reflection, I think that what is happening now will certainly be a business school case study, no doubt. It will help us to reflect on what can be improved in what was intended to be a good intention to have created that hybrid model. Because when the hybrid model, the structure is created, it was intended that the most valuable part of the technology itself is hosted in a non-profit organization, which means that the intention is to ensure that the technology is used for good. But at the same time, as we have talked about a lot today, a technology is used for good doesn't mean that it should not capitalize on the opportunities to make money. And that's why it has the hybrid model, which allows a licensing relationship to the for-profit arm or the for-profit entity of that nonprofit. So certainly a lot to reflect on in terms of governance, what investor stewardship needs to do, and how we can create better communication and structure on the back of this story. So that's my first take on it. Thank you.
So that's the first part. Talk a little bit then as far as it relates to your own specific industry and experiences there in terms of the risk rewards in leveraging AI and technology and investment.
Sure. It is a topic that is increasingly becoming an important topic that cuts across all markets and sectors. How do we capitalize on the opportunities of AI? And when it comes to AI, there are actually different types of AI. It started off with more sort of rules-based. So we should not confuse rules-based AI with what we are seeing as generative AI. What is generative? Generative means we make things up, right? We generate it. So the generative element is different from the rules-based AI, which a lot of it is about optimization. And then I am not going to go to HI. I'll leave it to you, Ilaria. What we're seeing is that we can analyze the risks and opportunities of AI in at least 3 components. And how I see it is the first category is what might be the embedded risks in a long supply chain. Because as corporates, very few corporates, if any, would develop a model from scratch. We are, especially in the generative AI model, which we call the general purpose model, a lot of computing power and data is required to get to that stage. So in one way, this kind of AI, general purpose AI, creates a lot of opportunities for people who can use it well to start at a much higher base. But then the additional issue is that if a corporate decided to use AI and buy a customized model that builds on OpenAI, do they understand the inherent data risks that might be involved? So as far as I can see when I'm engaging with companies nowadays, very few attention is put on what is the supply chain risk when an AI model is purchased from a third party. Because in an organization, you probably have a procurement department that assess third-party risks. And what we think we really need to do at this stage is to really get your data team, your risk team involved in understanding what is being bought, what is the model card. I mean, if you understand what a model card is, it's quite a common practice now to understand how the model is created, the underlying data, the testing results, and this is pretty much standard now for all the big tech model card. So that's the first one. And second one is the evolving in sector and industry initiatives, regulation. So I'll give an example here. For example, in the US, the FDA, in May 2023, noting that there's a lot more AI being used in drug discovery, which is very, very useful in optimizing, enhancing efficiency in drug discovery, it has introduced, or it is introducing a risk-based regulatory framework. And also, even if it's not AI related, for example, in the UK, you have Senior Manager Responsibility, which is SCMR, and which means that senior managers are personally liable and responsible for some of the decisions they make. So if a decision is made on purchasing a third-party AI model, and if there are liabilities associated with it, they might be personally liable. And the changes in sector and industry regulations or expectations would shape the risk appetite of each industry on the use cases in them. So that needs to pay attention. So that would be the second layer on top of the foundational layer of risks and opportunities we need to look at. And the third layer, I would say, is the last mile delivery of use cases. So if we use AI in our own decision making, so for example, if I use AI in summarizing my meeting notes and engagement, then I own the risk because I'm using it internally to determine how I'm going to deliver the outcome of that AI. But If I'm using an AI model in an interaction with a third party, for example, especially if retail customers are involved, consumers are involved, citizens are involved, then the risks are much higher because we are talking about consumer protection here. So I will stop there. I see it as 3 layers of risks and opportunities, and we shouldn't tilt too much on the risk side or too much on the opportunity side. So finding the right balance is where the art and the science of engagement is and investment is. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Ilaria, now maybe if you could address the 2 broad questions that we started with.
Yeah, of course, really well said. I learned so much. I think I will look at it, I'm not trying to be cheeky, but I think the OpenAI saga happened is nothing new under the sun, is it? Like thousands of years of history, wherever you have money and power at the highest level, there will be ego, there will be disagreement, there will be who gets more credit. So I first of all think everyone's kind of overreacting a little bit as audience, because this is actually very normal. But what is even more interesting to me is that people are so obsessed with this OpenAI drama the past few days over wars that are happening in the world. So there's a disproportionate interest and obsession with the AI field. Why? And I keep thinking to myself, because these days AI is like everything everywhere all at once to everyone, right? But most people, including myself, don't really know what it is, because I'm not subject domain expert. And I think one of the most important thing I would take away from this obsession on AI news, the personnel involved, is that we should all try to understand AI better so that we don't get freaked out about AI and also get freaked out about things that we shouldn't get freaked out about. So I'm not the expert, but I do live in San Francisco Bay Area where a lot of experts do live. One of them is Andrew Ng, who was the founder of Google Brain and chief scientist of Baidu. And he very securely says that he does not think AI will take over human beings over the next few decades. And by that he means, and what Christine alluded to, is API, which is a term called AGI, artificial general intelligence, which thinks that AI can take over all of human beings, everything that we are. And then, of course, the generative AI part is just generating content and be domain experts in specific areas, right? There is digital intelligence, there is also biological intelligence. So I think that the biological intelligence we have as human beings is so complex and multifaceted that we should actually be proud of who we are and not feel like it's going to be replaced, but at the same time be very realistic about what can generative AI help us, and how can it save time, how can it be a tool that we can do, and how can it make good people better. And people who think that jobs can be eliminated because of it, maybe think about why. Why are we scared that some automation tool can take away our jobs so easily? And is there a way we can upskill ourselves so that we are not that replaceable? A couple of use cases to show what generative AI can do these days. One is healthcare. I'm an advisor to a nonprofit called Health Unity in San Francisco Bay Area that's co-founded by a senior executive at NVIDIA and the Google AI Cloud's co-founder. And they want to democratize data for healthcare. So imagine if, unfortunately, one day your doctor says you have pancreatic cancer. I hope it doesn't happen to anyone, but it's a very scary news. Most people feel like it's a black hole when these rare diseases suddenly happen to you, and information available to everyday patients is very limited. So we have to completely trust the doctors and the few experts that, if we're lucky, that we can get access to tell us the truth. What if information, access about who are the best doctors out there, who are the doctors you can afford, which countries are they in, and previous patients who have recovered from it that have similar profiles to you are all available to you for you to help assess what you can do with your financial means, with your situation. I think in rare cases of diseases in healthcare, this is very helpful. But the risk of that is, yes, there could be data manipulation, synthetic data these days, which mimics real data, is very accurate, but at the same time, if it's not designed properly, it can be lead to misinformation and also maybe manipulated by people who are trying to take advantage of people for money, etc. Another area in education is very interesting too, is that I think education is actually one of the most antiquated systems out there in the world. Where I went to a local school in Hong Kong growing up, and the teacher-student ratio was 42:1. So my teacher had no idea what was going on with me. But later on, when the ratio goes down, you get more personalized attention, and that is where generative AI education tech breakthrough can really help. Some of the text says that it frees up teacher 1.5 days per week just with the technology's convenience helping that could free up the time for teachers to then focus on the students. We all learn differently, some visual, some audio, some kinesthetic, and we all need to have our patterns learned by people who are teaching us to optimize how do we teach us the better. I have terrible attention span, so I always get scolded by my teacher to look outside in the window after a minute. My neighbor never does that, so she never got scolded, and I felt discouraged in class, so I ended up hating statistics. What if that scenario doesn't have to happen now, and my teacher understands that I have to be engaged in a different way than my neighbor? So today, a lot of breakthroughs in generative AI can do that, but the risk of that is data bias, because actually a lot of great information out there and data collected from the education field are from the privileged class, from people who can enjoy education that has a lot of resources invested into them, that has attention to, even for us in this room to talk about AI, it really is a privilege. I think if this conference were held in Mindanao, Philippines, they might be talking about electricity connectivity, which is also a very real problem to accessibility to technology. So I think we just need to be very realistic, and most importantly, at Tech for Good Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank founded by Grab, we take digital literacy very seriously. We hope people can understand what are they putting their hands onto. So I think these days, let's upgrade it. Let's have algorithmic literacy. Let's understand what the algorithm is doing to us so that I actually have the power. Ladies, we have the power to not buy that pair of shoes, even though they prompt us to. It's up to us. We can choose, but we have to be educated. And I think that's really the theme of understanding the risk and the promises of generative AI. Know what we're getting ourselves into and know how it can enhance our lives so that we use it, it doesn't use us.
I'm going to follow up later on your point made about our obsession with AI. I've got many questions in my head now, but before that, Jasmine, your turn in addressing the two questions.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you for the opportunity to address the crowd today, especially on a day when the OpenAI news has been the headline. So let me start just to address the digital elephant in the room. We are committed to our partnership with OpenAI, and this is a statement that Satya has made also. We have confidence in our product roadmap and continue to innovate to support our customers and partners. So that's my written statement.
Excellent.
With that, I can say what I want to say. So as we look at opportunities and risks and challenges, and how do we look at artificial intelligence? At every point in history, technology has never stood still. It has taken different shape. I remember that, when the banking sector, when an ATM came into place, and the tellers were impacted, and as we think about this journey, and how do we look at technology, and why is this obsession? What is the underlying driver? The underlying driver to this is data. The fact is that we have large amount of data, but most of the organizations that we talk to are not aware of the data, the size of their data estate, which even goes to the foundation of what AI is built on, right? So what this has done is accelerated the model, and now governments and enterprises and everyone is trying to get the insight from their data, and that's what translates into what becomes artificial intelligence and the different usages. So going back to the data estate, large data, we have large data estates and poor insight. And now with this technology and with all that is available to us, we are able to generate and have greater outcome. But are there risks? Again, in history, we have seen whether we were having automotive vehicles, building roads, we have always had these challenges. And today, we are committed to 6 principles. Microsoft announced the Responsible AI Formula 6 years ago, in 2017 actually. And there's one principle that is critical, and that's being accountable. And human oversight has to be an important part of what we do. It is not something like Robocop that overtakes all of this and we think that it runs free. There has to be human oversight. And this does not mean we impede innovation. It means that we are able to have greater societal impact. Let me give you an example of how we do this in India. Farmers in India use artificial intelligence so that they can have better use of government services. Because of the complexity of language in India, they use AI so that farmers can now learn about the grants that are available to them and all of the facilities that are available to them. As we look at GovTech and the underlying technology that fuels GovTech, citizen services become improved, healthcare becomes improved, education becomes improved. Does that mean we do not, it means we allow for innovation to flourish, but we need guardrails. And this is a critical point at a time that I want to pivot and talk about. Policymakers used to make analog policies for the analog world. And now we are trying to take some of these analog policies and force fit it into the digital world, which does not work. And this is the biggest challenge that we have. Talking to regulators and talking to policymakers, one of the things that we are told is that, well, I have these policies and I'm trying to make it work in the digital world. The challenge is it has not only shape-shifted, it has transformed. Sometimes we need to look at how do we build some of these policies ground up. And the most important part of building policy in the digital world is the willingness to be agile. Agility is going to be critical. The biggest learning we have had is that, master plans, 5-year roadmaps, 10-year roadmaps, by the time they come out, the technology has moved on. And then the regulations and the policies then become irrelevant. So agility is going to be critical. And the final point I want to make here is, again, as regulators think about these policies and how, especially in government services and citizen services, I understand that 6 out of the 10 ASEAN countries is looking to refresh or look at their national digital ID, and AI is going to be an important element in this with cross-border data flows. How are we going to ensure that the data that is used, there are no biases, and we want to make sure that it is safe, secure, and trustworthy. At the same time, it serves its purpose. And when I studied law, this was 30 years ago, when I graduated with my law degree, I was told crime doesn't pay, but cybercrime pays. Cross-border data flows. As data becomes available, we also see that the bad actors are also using it. So there is a critical point that we need to balance. I think, Christina, you talked about balancing between, ensuring there's innovation, but also not impeding innovation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. I'm going to keep time and going to jump straight into the questions. And I think thank you for everyone who submitted the questions. But to use the opportunity of what Jasmine was talking about in terms of policy and regulation, and use that to address this one question, which is related. The question goes, as AI matures, we will be able, I suppose, to predict things like pre-existing conditions even when not disclosed, healthcare related, but larger sort of policy issues and regulation issues concerned. This will be used in pricing insurance. How do we codify protections here when nobody knows it's happening? So I think the larger issue here then is really the role of regulation, both internally within corporations as well as the role of larger government regulation. Maybe Ilaria, start first. Have you thought about this in the healthcare sector, in the use of AI here? And then maybe if Christine and Jasmine have views. If you don't, it's okay, and we can go to the many other questions I have and our room has as well. Ilaria.
Yeah. Pre-existing, well, that's why these days people are also using, I mentioned briefly, synthetic data, because in real world, data that we observe can tell us a lot, but there are two things. One, it's expensive. So these days, actually, synthetic data, which is data generation that mimics real world data, can almost be 100 times cheaper than real life collection of data. So these synthetic data, though, at the same time can also eliminate some of the irregular patterns that happen in real life. So I think in healthcare, they're just starting to see what is the right way to use the data correctly. And yes, I mean, we don't know, it's hard to codify, but at the same time, insurance sector also loves using the predictive analytics because, and same as financial sector, right? Whether it's predicting fraud or predicting how to give payments, and all of this data, the more we can feed into the LLMs, the more we can learn about what is going on. So I think nothing is completely certain. I think if I'm getting the question right, is that, you know, nobody really knows a lot of things are happening. What we can do is provide the best resources we can at hand when different permutations happen. And so that's why it's very groundbreaking for the healthcare field.
Christine, how do you see governance and regulation evolving? I mean, things have changed so quickly in the last year already.
Regulation, definitely. So for example, the EU AI Act was supposed to be effective earlier in the year, but because of the introduction of the large language models, it has been delayed. And recently, if you can see the latest news, just in early November, there has been debates about whether foundational models need to be regulated. I think the views are still quite diverse. In the EU, there are different voices as to whether they should be, or maybe the current voluntary code of conduct is already be sufficient. And I think this is still up for a debate, but certainly at the use case level, there needs to be some form of regulation because that is the last mile delivery with impact, right? But back to this question, what we need to know is, we remind ourselves is that AI is probabilistic. In language model, it is also, when it generates sentences, it is still looking at what is the highest probability of the sentence given the question that is being asked. So what insurance companies here, they are just using the same logic of what is the probability of certain conditions happening. So the inherent principles of pricing hasn't actually changed, except that the methods they are using is different. So I think we need to debate whether those methods are appropriate and fair, but the fact that those methods exist, we cannot refute that we should not use them.
Jasmine?
I think as we think about any of these, you know, this is an example in healthcare and insurance. There has to be underlying principles that's non-negotiable, and that would include ethical practices and explainability. And consumers, customers, people need to be able to have a choice. So the balance, and I agree with you, Christina, that there has the method and how do they discern and get the insight. But again, there are no guarantees, right? Because we don't know where this is heading. But ensuring that there is ethical practices and explainability in any of these regulatory environment is going to be critical. And I think whether it is the Hiroshima process that was recently announced at the G7 or the White House Code of Conduct, I think all of that comes back to making sure that there is that ethics and explainability. What are the roles and responsibility at the deployer level, and what are the roles and the developer stack and the deployer stack, and that's still evolving. I think it's critical. We learn as we go, and we don't have the answers today, but there are some principles that are applicable.
I'm going to use that opportunity then to jump to the next question from the floor. Thank you very much. This one has one of the highest numbers of votes as well. What's your point of view on the critical challenge of AI and tech that it enhances bias reinforcement and misinformation? How can it help to ensure ethical decision making and responsible practices? I like this question because it allows us to start talking a little bit as we conclude about what steward leadership looks like, but talk a little bit about ethical decision making and responsible practices. Christine, you can see the question there.
Well, there's a big question with all the right keywords.
Yes.
Right, to start off with. Making ethical decisions is never a simple approach because it's not something that is rules-based. It's almost contextual and also depending on the circumstances. So we have seen over the years, I think the first set of AI principles probably came out from corporates in 2017.
Yes.
Correct. Thank you very much. You know the details. At corporate level, more and more companies are having the AI principles. And markets and countries are also coming up with their AI principles. But what we need to move on to now is actually examples of how those principles are deployed. Because it's easy to say that, yes, we need fairness, we need transparency. And I think that the model card has done that. Is that enough? Is that not enough? Why is it not enough? Why is it coming up with the same words? So I think that and understanding the biases is also quite complex because the bias may not be intentional. It could be that data bias comes in when, say, I'm developing a model using the data from San Francisco and trying to understand the population of how people behave in San Francisco. But I want to bring that product to work in London and do the same measurement. Would it work? No, because it's a different population. And that is the bias that comes in the data. But is that intentional? Maybe not. And that's why what I mentioned in supply chain, when you buy something and use it somewhere else, we need to be careful about what those issues are. And misinformation is a real issue, especially we're coming up with the election year next year. And we're very likely to see those situations. And I guess as citizens, it is inevitable. Especially all of us has some form of digital footprint. Our own profile might exist somewhere, and there will be someone who wants to leverage our profile to get us to press the right button. But that is not so different from a marketing approach. So it is something that is probably bigger than what I can do. It is to be aware of, and regulation needs to come in to provide some basic guardrails on that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, digital literacy, again, right? We need to be smart ourselves and have discerning power ourselves. We can't just believe whatever we read or even what people tell us, as much as we, respect or love them. We have to have our own brain to discern. But I think industry-specific approach is important because you also need domain experts to actually be able to spot what is right and what is not, right? If there is data being fed into has forced some kind of bias that is not correctly reflecting the right outcome, someone who is really experienced in that domain should know. And so industry-specific approach helps. For example, MAS has issued governance framework for financial institutions because they know what's going on so that the AI and data analytics that's used in financial institutions can be monitored. Each sector needs to have that. I think there's an outrage too about bias reinforcement, misinformation, when people think that only a few players in tech have the right to write the code and do all that, and rest of us are left out, yet we have to suffer the consequences. Well, writing the rules of AI and the future of AI requires civil society, industry players, and the tech players, and government. So ensuring that everyone has a voice will be very important to have a balanced view. In many ways, we just got to get smarter about all of this and be able to spot things when it's not right.
May I make a comment on top of that as well?
Yeah,
so besides sector guidance, use case guidance is also important. So in June 2023, the US Equal Employment Opportunities Commission has issued AI guidance for employers. When you use AI in employment, in job interviews, in performance assessment, it talks about, it provides guidance on how to address potential adverse impact on the workforce. And I think it's an area that companies may be using some form of AI, or maybe a pre-recorded video, AI ranking of applicants, or CV screening. This is actually currently being used, and in fact, the acceleration of the pace of using AI in human capital management accelerated during COVID because we don't actually meet with people in person. And during that period, this has really accelerated. So it is something that I think we really should pay attention to.
Thanks, Christine. Jasmine.
I think I want to anchor back to the fact that the pace at which this is moving, critical to ensuring that bringing from principle to practice, we need to be able to test them. And the sandbox model, I think, is going to be critical here. Governments are putting up regulatory framework, but it has also to be tested because we do not know what is the outcome. So one of the recommendations we are seeing and being widely used is industry based sandboxes to ensure that not only there is that statement about ethical decision making, but there is a bit of testing that is done as well.
We have just about 1 minute left, so maybe I will unfortunately have to wrap up, and thanks to everyone for the questions. One maybe way to wrap up, and we've sort of delved into the weeds a little bit, so take it a little bit higher. We all know, and the journalist in me has to see what the common man is trying to think about AI and what his questions may be. We've seen all the comparisons when people talk about AI, whether it's nuclear annihilation, whether it's the end of the world. Clearly, there are questions, as you said, Ilaria. People are getting overly obsessed, born maybe from a lack of knowledge and information. What, in your minds, each of you, what in your mind does a good steward leader look like in this field now? Because he or she will have responsibilities to convey what they are doing ethically, what they're doing responsibly, but as well as explaining what they're doing in a way that is understandable and digestible for the common man to be able to accept it and not get, as you say, obsessed by Ilaria. So maybe Christine, and we conclude here. Before I must say as well, I must give a shout out to the final question that I thought needs to be voiced. Is AI evil? No question mark here. But it is there, and it is therefore a sentiment. How would you address it through the lens of a steward leader?
Right, happy to start first. I would focus and challenge the way we educate, not just next generation, for everyone really, and the way we learn. Educate is different from learning. Educate is more passive, like what is the system, what is a success in education? I think we need to rethink on that. We need to think about how we should learn, which is a proactive activity, not just being educated, which is more of a passive activity, to really establish critical thinking, not just talking about that we have critical thinking. Think about interacting with ChatGPT, for example. A good job might be being a good prompt writer. That's not easy. To be able to harness the scale that ChatGPT or large language models can provide, but asking the intelligent questions so that you can critically challenge the underlying information that is being used and being generated. And that requires almost a new form of skills that we don't normally have in our existing education system. So if we're looking at steward leadership, I think we'll start off from the way we learn, how do we challenge our way of thinking, how can we triangulate information so that we are in a position to investigate effectively what is being available. So is AI evil? AI is neither evil nor, what is the opposite? Sorry, I don't want to use.
All good.
Yeah. Well, it's just neutral. It's just a technique. So I would say that just depends on how we use it.
Can't agree more. Tech, I mean, AI as a form of tech. Tech is neutral. It depends on how we use it. I've seen really evil uses of tech that, child pornography, trafficking. It magnifies who you really are behind the screen, behind the keyboard. So let's be smart about how we want to use it, because it can scale, definitely. It can go viral. Yeah. And what was the original question?
Basically, what would...
nuclear war.
No, but what would basically a good steward leader look like? In your minds, if you say, hey, this is an executive training course, we're doing one on AI, what are the sort of ethical decision-making skills you need, education skills,
I think a good leader is not is not insecure. So this leader will not try to protect their territory by not sharing inside knowledge to other people just to protect their own turf. I think if you're a good leader, especially if you're in a field as technical as AI, try to dumb it down for people like me. Try to use human language to explain so that we understand what you're doing, and invite people who are on the same level as you in terms of technical know-how to keep you accountable, so that there is a multi-pronged approach to be transparent and inclusive.
Good point. Jasmine?
I think, pivot again a bit, I would like to say that AI is a technology, and AI is a technology that is here today, that can be used for development, that can be used for societal impact, and it can be a competitive differentiator. And we want to, as we think about nations and investments, I think people are at the center of all of these countries, and making sure that they are future-proof. Prompt engineers, as jobs change shape because of artificial intelligence, how do we ensure that everyone becomes a serial learner, upskilled, reskilled, and our curriculums are actually future-proofed as well. And we are agile in making sure that our students, our workers, and our employment base is continuously upskilled. And I think that would be a critical part of this conversation.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm glad we ended with some concrete ideas. Jasmine, Ilaria, and Christine, thank you so much. Thank you to the floor as well. Thank you.